So in 1678, that was a long time ago, a book was published by the name of The Pilgrim's Progress. And I read this book this week to prepare for this sermon. And this book, The Pilgrim's Progress, is really widely regarded as one of English literature's most significant works of theological fiction. And just until about 50 years ago, no book outside of the Bible had sold more copies than this book. So that tells you what it's actually meant to the world. And this book is actually just an allegory for the Christian life. And it tells the story of a character who is appropriately named Christian. And he goes on this really perilous journey to this place called the Celestial City, which is just heaven. And in the book, Christian realizes that he needs something bigger than anything that the world can really produce for him. And he begins this journey. He kind of leaves behind his everyday life. And on this journey, Christian encounters all kinds and sorts of spiritual dangers and physical dangers. And they try to kind of pull him off his path over and over and over so he actually can't finish his journey. And some of these monsters that show up in the book, or these natural barriers or evil characters, they go by the names of things that we all recognize in our lives. Their names are like worldly wisdom. There's the valley of humiliation. He meets with doubt. He meets with the law. And other things that we really all experience in and out of our normal lives. And some of them even appear at first sight to be good, and then it becomes evident that they're not good at all. They just kind of have this like facade of blessing on them. And really what's pretty interesting is all the time that Christian is on this journey, he has a sack that's like attached to his back. They don't really go into it, but he can't figure out how to get it off or lose it. And he really just kind of calls it his burden. And it represents his past life of sin, the shame that he's actually carrying in his life from sin, some of the trauma that he has from his own life. And mostly it's just an awareness of himself as just a broken human being. It's a pretty fascinating story, and I don't want to ruin the end for you. You should just all read it. It's wonderful. But what I didn't know is this week when I read this book, I always like to research authors a little bit too. And I started researching the author of this book, whose name was John Bunyan. And it made sense to me that he was kind of uniquely the right person to write this book. Bunyan was himself a Christian and ended up a Christian in a kind of a strange way. But he knew about the life of poverty. He grew up poor. He had immense struggles with doubt, specifically in regards to trusting the Bible. He lost his wife after only 6 years of marriage, and they had 4 children. So he became a single father. And then he was put in jail for over 12 years because of his faith. See, he was uniquely in a position to write a book about the Christian life and the struggles that come with it. And through his life, he had events and circumstances, people, and sin patterns that kept trying to pull him off of this path that he was trying to get to. And it's really pretty hard to imagine that Bunyan did not have our text in mind today when he wrote this book. And what we're going to do today is we're going to ask the Bible a kind of a question. We're going to say, how did somebody like John Bunyan, who had such a tough life, make it in the end? And we're going to look at ourselves, or how do we, in this instance, actually make it to the end? How do we actually maintain faith in a world that's the same exact world that John Bunyan himself lived in too? So our text today is really appropriate. It comes from the book of Hebrews, and we're not actually totally sure who wrote the book of Hebrews. There's some fun fan theories out there. But we're confident that we know a lot about the audience that's actually receiving this letter. And they had their own set of problems and tensions and struggles with life. There were some circumstances around them that were kind of causing them to sink back into isolation. They were experiencing real physical and spiritual damage because of those circumstances. And they were pretty much in danger of losing their faith in God, which was the greatest gift that they had ever been given. So the author of the book of Hebrews knows this to be true and writes this letter to them to kind of encourage them in the midst of this. What he's doing is saying, hey, finish this race well. It's the same thing that Bunyan was telling his audience. And the text that we're reading in Hebrews 12 today comes right on the back of a pretty famous chapter from scriptures, and it's Hebrews 11. And this is known commonly as like the Hall of Faith, because it's basically like the Hall of Fame. Some Christian thought that was going to be a good pun, and they called it that, and now we're stuck with it. But what the author sees really clearly is that there is a long list of people who have actually maintained faith through their life, and they serve as examples for all of us. That's why Hebrews 11 is called that. So in this sermon, what we're actually going to do is look at three things, for those of you that like outlines. First thing we're going to do is we're actually going to look at the race of the Christian life. What does that mean? Secondly, we're going to look at the discipline that it takes to finish this race. And finally, we're going to look at what the finish line is itself. So one more time, we're going to look at the race of the Christian life, we're going to look at the discipline to finish, and we're going to look at the finish line itself. So looking at our very first point today, which is the race of the Christian life. Just mentioned this, but right before our text today, the author of the book of Hebrews names in chapter 11 kind of the heroes and heroines of the faith. And he uses this to make a point that starts our text off today. If you see, the very first word of our text today is therefore. So let's read verse 1 together. I'll put this back up on the screen for you guys. It says, therefore, remember, famous people maintain faith to the end. Since that happened, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. What we get here is a pretty interesting metaphor for what Christianity is. And I think one of the fun things about Christianity is that not only is like the Bible the Word of God, it's highly regarded as just a literary masterpiece. And so much of the Bible actually contains a lot more than we get on the first pass. It takes an understanding of language and context and setting to really get a complete picture of what's going on. For an example, Jesus often uses metaphors and parables, and Jesus knew a lot about farming and growing things. So a lot of his examples have an agricultural context or backdrop to them. And if you want to fully understand what Jesus is talking about, you actually have to understand how things grow and what that culture was like. Another really prominent biblical author, Paul, was not a farmer. You can tell this by his writing. He was more of like a social elite. He uses metaphors of like social events, societal structures, servants, masters. But one that Paul often uses himself is this metaphor of racing or being an athlete. He compares that to being a Christian. And we live in Colorado, so we live in the land of elite athletes. One thing I always say is there's somebody better than you at it in Colorado, right? So the author of the book of Hebrews uses a metaphor here similar to Bunyan's book. And in Bunyan's book, he calls it this road to salvation. That's the journey that Christian is on in that book. And the author of the book of Hebrews uses the same metaphor as Paul, which is an endurance race. So suppose you've participated in an endurance sport. You can probably already paint a pretty clear picture of what the Christian life is like. It's not easy. It's not one that you can actually just tackle passively. It's not always fun. It takes a lot of hard work to finish. The author of the book of Hebrews uses this common metaphor to encourage his readers, who are most likely in the midst of a life that feels hard. They know something's on the line, and they're kind of wondering if they have the energy to finish it or if it's worth it to finish it. It's really a beautiful metaphor. And what we can take away from that is it means that following Christ is not going to be some like leisure-filled, pleasurely stroll through the woods. You'll have times like that. But instead, being a Christian is something that you actually need to train for. It takes discipline, preparation, thought, and adjustment of priority. And I know a lot of people who are endurance runners, and I've watched what it does to their lives. This training process actually upends many facets of their life. The food you eat changes. The things you drink change. Your time at work and home change as well. You actually have to start scheduling your life around your training to be able to do this race and finish it. It takes a ton of work and adjustment. If you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. And the author is telling us that following Christ is exactly the same way. He's kind of saying, like, the world is going to chew you up and spit you out if you aren't actively engaged in this. And in fact, just 2 chapters before our text today, and then again in chapter 6, the author of the book of Hebrews is actually warning readers that there's a real and present danger of not finishing this race well. So it's one we need to see with clarity, recognize the dangers, and kind of like step into with intention. And this is something we've actually been talking about our entire Advent sermon series, that life can just be hard at times. And I think it's okay to admit that. Sometimes it's just the cost of following Jesus that makes it like that. Sometimes it's outside persecution. Sometimes it's a loss of resources. And for the audience reading this letter, it was like social isolation. They were being ostracized. Political pressure was being placed on them, threats of persecution. It's pretty much the same as what we experience today in our own culture. And if you're new to church and thinking like, why in the world would I ever want to be a Christian if I'm signing up for something that's actually going to make my life hard? I appreciate that question. I think it's a fair question. It was one that I kind of like was thinking about, and I was like, I don't know if I have a great answer to that this week. And I thought, I'm going to actually spend some time thinking about it. And then I saw a bumper sticker, and it just said this. It said, life sucks, and then you die. And I was like, oh, it's kind of like exactly what just life is, isn't it? It doesn't really matter if you are a Christian or not. When you just hang around people, you see that circumstances, and they can just be hard in their own way, regardless of what faith you have or what religion you don't have. The difficulty and tension and just like struggle of life really doesn't discriminate whether or not you're a Christian. It's something that's actually going to come for everybody in some way or some capacity. I asked myself, like, who would actually say that quote? That feels really sad. And then I looked that up too, and I found out it was from a Stephen King novel. And I was like, oh, it all makes sense. That's where that would come from. And then Stephenie Meyer stole it and used it in the Twilight Saga. You can discover all of these things on the internet. So it's out there. But it really, the point of that is that this is just kind of conventional wisdom, that life is just going to get hard at some point. We're seeing this from authors who have nothing to do with the church. Life is hard. So what do you do about it? The difference, though, and I think this is the difference between not having faith and having faith, is that Christianity, when life gets hard, there's actually hope at the end. This is what makes it, it's what will make it appealing. This life of following Jesus will take hard work and perseverance and discipline, but it culminates with so much more than just death. So much more. We get redemption. There's hope and light at the end of our tunnel. So if that's the life that we're kind of signing up for, the author of the book of Hebrews is going to give us 3 things as words of encouragement. And they're going to be disciplines that kind of help us navigate the Christian life and do it well, which is going to bring us into our second point today. So, like, what is the actual discipline to finish the endurance race of the Christian life? So we could put verse 1 back up here again. And it's right here in verse 1. Let's read this together again. It says, therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely. And let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. So there it is. The first thing that we are to do, according to the author of the book of Hebrews, is to lay aside every weight. And this is interesting. Different translations will present this differently. It's been a little bit difficult to actually figure out what it means in English. The NIV says to throw off every weight that hinders. Or Eugene Peterson, I actually like his here. He even translates this with the command. He says, hey, strip down and throw off your spiritual fat. He's leaning heavy into this endurance race. This means that there are actually things in our lives that are not bad in and of themselves, but they sometimes add weights or burdens to our lives. It makes it more challenging to run this race that we've been called to run. And so much in our world actually exists in this space. I feel this own tension in my life with technology, like the busyness of parenting, following my favorite sports teams, food or drink or hobbies or outdoor experiences. In fact, one of my favorite books is this book called Screwtape Letters. And in this book, there's a devil who's writing to another devil about how to torment and make these people's lives harder. What they're doing is they're actually talking about how do we actually add weights to these people that we're kind of tormenting. And the book gives some really great insight here. And one of the devil's names is Wormwood. He's like the devil in training who's receiving the letters that the book is based on. And what he's told, this sounds so subtle, but he's told, hey, you need to find some ways to add like a consumeristic mindset to this person. You're patient. And he spends many chapters talking about exactly how to do this thing. What he's doing is taking something that's fine, like the want that we have inside of us, and he's making it ultimate. He's turning it into something that's actually going to hold the patient back in the end. That's what a weight is. And here's an example from my own life. In 2018, during the Easter season, Megan, my wife, and I picked up a Lent reading guide at this church, but we were at the other spot. And on that guide, every week had a different fast for us to do, and then different things to read at night. And one of the things that it told us to do is, hey, take a week fasting from any and all types of social media. And I had like a handful of those on my phone. So Megan and I both deleted them for a week. We were like, 7 days, no problem at all. And this really kind of bizarre thing started to happen. I'd be in the midst of like the typical parts of my day, really normal things. And I found myself like actually reaching into my pocket, pulling my phone out, trying to open it up and access those apps that were not there. I was doing this with no predetermined thought to do it. I hadn't planned to do it. I didn't have a reason to do it. I was acting like a force of habit, or probably just an addiction, truly. And it was something I was just unaware of. I had no idea the significant influence that this was actually having on my life. I wondered how many hours of my days had I just burned away doing something I wasn't even aware that I was doing. Things like that are weights. And in the metaphor of our athlete, it's like the extra pounds of clothing, adornments, or body weight that we need to shed. But for us in the pursuit of the Christian life, it's going to be other things. So fortunately, in this case, I was kind of able to recognize one for what it was because of just participating in a little simple activity. But what this does is it gives us a discipline, a thing we can actually do, which is to take an audit of your life and see what these things are, what exists in this space for you. So ask yourselves these questions. What in your life is actually slowing you down? What is stealing your focus? What becomes an extra burden that you may not even be aware of? And if you want an extra challenge, go find a really close friend and ask them that question about you. An extra challenge would be to ask your spouse or your kids. See what they say. Your kids will know. The great thing, though, is that when we do this work, we actually end up getting faster, we get stronger, and you get to actually see the goal, the finish line, with a lot more clarity. So the author then gives us a second discipline. We get this again in verse 1, in the first verse. And it says we should throw off every sin. The exact text in verse 1 says, sin which clings so closely. So if weights are things that are not in and of themselves bad, they just kind of exist in our lives, the sins are the things that literally trip you in your race. They knock you off your feet, they hold you in place, prevent you from reaching your goal. Again, I like the way that the NIV Bible translates this. It says we should throw off every sin that so easily entangles. Easily. It doesn't take much for sin to actually grab you, entangle us, and prevent us from being the runners that we should be. I had a professor in seminary whose name was Michael Kruger, and I didn't know it at the time, but he was really famous. And I just kind of went through his class and then found out he's like the prominent scholar on our text today. So my seminary professor, I went and read his commentary on this, and I actually have this. We can throw it up today. But he's actually reflecting on this word easily here. And here are his words. He says, you do not have to work very hard to be entangled by sin. In fact, that's the default of the human life. If you do nothing to fight it, sin will cling tightly. So if you're going to run the race, you have to be proactive in fighting it. It's like kind of terrifying, isn't it? This means that at all points in our lives, we have actually sin presenting itself in a way that can easily entangle us. And what's even more terrifying is the thing that would entangle me is not going to be the thing that entangles you. But it's just as deadly. It's still going to trip. And each of us has different dispositions. We have inclinations and preferences toward these sins. It takes a massive amount of intentionality and discipline to fight this. Again, we get the same discipline. You have to do an audit of your life. And in this kind of strange moment of encouragement, we actually get a little bit of a partner in this work here. And it's the author of our text today. And this would be pretty easy to miss, but if you go back and look at verse 1, the third word in here tells us who our relational partner is in this. It's we. This means that it is not a text for you or you alone, but this is like a text for us, including the author of part of our Bible. And I just want to hear that if you're looking at your own life and thinking that you're just alone in it, it actually just can't be true. There's nothing that you can't confess. There's nothing you can't talk about or deal with. You're actually not alone. This is an us situation for everybody here. I have sin that easily entangles me. So do you. So does the author. It's part of living in a broken world where full redemption isn't all the way here yet. And one of the most unfortunate things about kind of our cultural moment is that we kind of live in a world where sometimes people will be presented as perfect, and it feels like it's not actually okay to talk about these things. But we know that there's sin that easily entangles every single person. We're not alone in being broken. No one is perfect. So we can talk about these things in confidence. And as part of the leadership team of this church, we actually have things that we do to fight against this. On the second Wednesday of every month, I meet with Rich, and we actually have a list of questions that we go through on these mornings. And these questions go like this. I brought them. First one is we say, hey, how are you doing? And we answer that question, both of us. And then we ask, hey, what are you currently repenting or walking away from right now? And then we ask, what do you need prayer for? We ask, what's going really well in your life right now? And then we ask, what's going particularly hard in your life right now? We ask how each other's marriage is, we ask how our families are, and then we spend time praying for each other. Every second Wednesday of the month, we do that. And it's hard, if not impossible, to get through those questions and not have the dark parts of our souls kind of bubble up to the surface. And we do this because we're aware of this text. There is sin that exists that can easily entangle every single person. And we want to actively fight against it. We share with each other on a deep and personal level. Rich kind of knows the inclinations of my heart during that time. Rich is aware of what I need help with. And not only does he know those things, but he's also there to just encourage me in the midst of that. I'd be dead in the water without these types of relationships in my life. And I'm not saying that's the perfect solution by any means. That's just a way that we try to do this. But we do know that everyone, me and you and the author, actually have to figure out and do this work with intentionality. And this is going to help us become the best racer we can in the Christian life. And then finally, we get a third discipline here as well. Again, still captured in the very first verse of our text. Let's read verse 1 again. It says, therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, Let us lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. So we got the discipline of casting off the weights in our lives, the second of casting off sins, and then we get this third discipline that I'm just going to call looking to people outside of yourself. And we get this discipline too in a few different angles, actually. We get the witnesses that are mentioned right here in verse 1, which are the people that come from Hebrews chapter 11. But ultimately, in just a second, we're told not only do we look to them, but we're actually also looking to Jesus as well. So when he says, since we're surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, this can be a little bit confusing. Sometimes people will imagine that like you have these witnesses and they're like sitting in the stands and you're running the race and they're kind of cheering you on. Yeah, Clark, you can do it. Which is kind of true, but it's actually not the fullest meaning that's there. A better and fuller meaning is that what we're doing is they're witnessing to us that they've already run the race and that it's worth finishing. The author is kind of saying like, look, they did it and you can do it. He's kind of saying like, use them as an example. And what's interesting is that they're a group of people with checkered backgrounds, and they are just like us. They did the real work of throwing off weights and sins in their own lives. And sometimes they did this in the midst of like real struggle and pain. And they yet still finished the race well. I encourage you to like go read these stories of these people who get mentioned in Hebrews chapter 11. You get stories like Noah and Sarah and Abraham and Samson and David and Rahab. Men and women who did the race well. And you see they had significant patterns in their life of sin and doubt and recklessness and chasing after worldly pleasures. They had points where they were easily entangled by sin. And yet they're still the model for us. That's who we look to. I can actually read that list and take a little bit of a breath. I'm like, I'm not alone. They're kind of just like me. We need that in our lives. And while this text maybe doesn't actually explicitly state this point, but something we can take away, and maybe the most like weighty piece of all of this, is that while we do desperately need witnesses in our lives and people that we're looking for, or looking to, like the example of Jesus, we actually can't miss the point that we ourselves are also witnesses. We're like called saints. Those of us who are Christians. Every single one of you that follows Jesus is witnessing to something. I could promise you that there's like somebody in your life who's paying attention. If you have kids, they're watching how you run the race. If you have a roommate, they're watching. If you have parents, they're watching. That adds a little bit extra here as well. 2 weeks ago, my daughter Afton, who is turning 7 on Saturday, it was a Monday night, and I was cooking dinner, and she sat at the table, and she pulled a chair out for me. She was like, "Dad, I need you to come and sit down." And I was like, "What's happening?" And she was like, "Dad, what does peace mean to you?" And I was like, "Wow, I'm crushing it as a parent. Like, whose child is this that they would come to me and ask my opinion on peace in the world to be educated in the ways of the Lord?" And I was like, I'm just crushing it right now. And what I quickly realized is that the day before, Ben Seaton, who was our elementary teacher, had taught a lesson on peace in the elementary class. And she was not asking my opinion, she was quizzing me. So I was like, dang it. I was so close to just being really good. And my world kind of pretty quickly crumbled in this moment. And what she was doing in that moment is she was actually looking to her Sunday school teacher. And I gave Afton my answer, and she does this face like this, and she's like, that was an okay answer. And I was like, dang, this is harsh. But what had actually happened that day is that Ben had been able to witness to my daughter in their class on Sunday what peace actually was. I was getting educated by a 7-year-old. And if you know Ben can actually answer that question better than most. Ben understands it, and he was actually able to put that into our kids. Ben is showing them that what does like a peaceful life look like when you follow Jesus. That's the witness. And I have this story from Ben in recent weeks, but like this is literally the work. We brought Jenny up here earlier. This is literally the work that the people in our kids' classes are doing every single Sunday. And they may not even articulate this, but they are like willing witnesses to the youngest generation of God's people. You are the ones kind of in the stands right now for our children on Sundays. You're showing them what it looks like to run after Jesus and do this race well. And there's like one thing that I'm beyond sure about. Rich must have looked at my notes during the announcements because I was going to say the same thing he did. But our kids love their teachers on Sundays. I like never hear grumbling from them about going to class on Sunday mornings. They really think our teachers are the most like remarkable people on the planet. I was actually asking my kids this week, like, who's your hero? You know who they said? Annie and Kalena Iggy. They literally want to be you guys when they grow up. There you are, I see you right in the middle. But that's the witness. Those are like the ones who are kids, like they want to be you. They're watching you. How cool is that? The point is that all of you are actually witnessing to somebody. It's just kind of the question of like, how are you doing it? Or maybe it's on the flip side. Maybe you're just in a spot right now where you just need to find somebody and chase them down and have them be a witness to you. There's willing people around here to do that. And the culmination here, though, is that these witnesses, while they are kind of cheering us on in one sense, they're actually not looking at us in this race. Begs this question of like, what are they actually looking to? And we see this in the second two verses of our text today. Let's put those up. Those witnesses are looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. So the answer to that question of who are these witnesses actually looking to is they're looking to Christ himself. That's the model for us to follow. And they call Jesus here the founder and perfecter of our faith. And commentators of this text have kind of tried to figure out what those two words mean. But an interesting one to kind of think about is that most of them say this kind of is captured with this word trailblazer. They're saying Jesus is actually the trailblazer of the Christian life. Jesus was the one who went first. He went before us and showed us how this work is to be done. And I mentioned this earlier, but this is the hope in the midst of a Christian life that can be hard. The text just said that Jesus was the trailblazer of a hard life, and he was a hard life because he endured the cross and shame. And then in verse 2, he's the one who endured hostility against himself in verse 3. But the difference in having a hard life, like that kind of bumper sticker said, that just kind of ends up leading to death, is that Jesus actually had a purpose and a vision to navigate a hard life. It says he's eventually going to be seated at the right hand of God. And that's where Jesus has taken us to when we're following him in this race. We don't just have death at the end. We actually have Jesus taking us with him. How cool is that? Jesus is our ultimate witness and trailblazer, and he blazed a path for all of these characters in the Old Testament to follow as well. And it's one that we can also look to. So to finish this today, here's a silly story. This time of year, we have a Christmas playlist. We've been adding songs to it for every year for the last 7 years. And there's one song on it that really kind of catches us in a funny mood every year. I can't believe I'm about to say this. But it's "Oh Holy Night" by Celine Dion. And if you've not heard that song, you just do yourself a gift today. It's amazing. But what happens when that song is on in our house, it's usually loud, all of us end up believing that we can sing like Celine Dion. If you came and pulled the plug on my house it would be the worst thing you'd ever heard in your life. But when that volume's up, we sound good. Because what we're doing is we're actually leaning into the strength of Celine Dion in that moment. She's kind of covering all of our faults and how bad we are. And it's like all we need to do is just stay close to Celine and we can sing. And the same thing applies to this text today. When you actually stay close to Jesus in this race, it covers up your faults. It gets you through it. You actually can run the race with him and finish it well. So let's pray. Father, we ask, God, for the awareness and skill, community, and discipline to just be able to finish the race that you have set before us as disciples of Jesus. God, I ask that you both give us witnesses in our lives, God, and we can see where there's opportunities to witness to each other. Father, this is a gift that you've just given our church body, and I ask that we can just answer this call while the entire time looking to the cross and Jesus there. Amen.